Good morning, everyone. Today we'll deal with the poem The Patriot by Nissim Ezekiel. When we talk about Nissim Ezekiel, I'm sure most of you know that he is an Indian Jewish poet who has been described as the father of post-independence Indian verse in English. And Nissim Ezekiel would be perhaps the first Indo-Anglican poet to show us that the form of a poem is as important as its content or subject matter. The craftsmanship is as important as the subject matter. So when he was writing poetry, he never considered writing poetry as a very casual affair. So he believed that writing poetry involved a lot of hard work, and he always was of the view that a good poet would wait for the right words to come, because he regarded a poem as an integrated organic composition. So for him, the structure, the form, the words, the phrases, all were very important. They all had kind of a lot of vital concern when it came to him writing poetry. When we look at his language, we know that Nissim Ezekiel is quite economical in the use of language, because he believed that words had to be very clear, direct, and so he practiced economy. And he adopted the conversational style in most of his poetry. His poems are very simple, and there is this conversational ease, and that is why we remember most of his poems, like Goodbye Party to Miss Pushpa Tears, The Night of a Scorpion, The Railway Clerk. All these poems are very interesting, but very direct, very clear, and the words used are, in a conversational style. He also uses, some colloquial idioms sometimes, and those idioms that he uses shows gives us a very fine combination of clear expression and the cogency of argument, because he is one person who does not bring in any obscurity. His poem, that's what I said, his poems are very clear, they're never obscure, right? And he always tries to bring in the bare statement as it is. So it's really interesting when you read his poems. And as I said earlier, he shows a very keen sense of form and structure when it comes to poem, and he uses the right words in the right places. So, the words that he said, the words that he chooses are very carefully chosen. He says the poet should wait till he gets the right words, right? So we have to really praise the way he uses the words in the exact way, or you can say the exactness in the use of words, right? And he uses words some very common everyday vocabulary. He does not use very bombastic or archaic words. He creates a very fine poetic effect by trying to blend sound, sense, and he also uses the contemporary idiom to impart simplicity, clarity of expression, etc. Nissim Ezekiel is also very popular for his rich sense of humor, for his sharpness of wit and irony. And in many of his poems, he has ridiculed the absurdities and follies of Indian people. So you can say that most of his poems are quite satirical. He has used humor and irony also as his main weapons. If you have read Goodbye Party for Miss Pushpa Tears, you'll see how ironical it is. Even Railway Clerk is, it's very humorous, witty, and ironical. And he also uses very suggestive symbols and images in his poetry. And through these devices, what he tries to do is the abstract idea is presented before us in a very concrete manner, right? So, in his poetry, you have images like river, hills, wind, sun, city, nature. These are all kind of very recurring images in most of his poems. And what he uses, why does he use these images? He uses these images to, I would say, skillfully bring out a graphic picture of human life or to present a slice of human life, right? So most of his poems have a very pictorial quality because, we are able to kind of get vivid pictures of the places that he speaks about the people that he speaks about. So we understand that Nissim Ezekiel is one of those Indian poets writing in English who tries to create an authentic flavor of India, and he uses the Indian English, or you would say the bazaar English or the pigeons English, and sometimes people call it the Babu Angrezi. So in this particular poem that we have to study, the Patriot, we see how the Indian flavor has been created by stressing on the various mistakes that Indians commit in the use of English, by bringing in the hopes and aspirations of free India, and also he tries to bring in the attitudes of the two hostile neighbors of India, China and Pakistan. So here in this particular poem, we see that the narrator is a patriot, and a patriot who claims that he stands for peace and non-violence. Now, this patriot questions, why is the world fighting? Why aren't we following Mahatma Gandhi and his wisdom? Right? And you see here, this narrator, he is one person who reads the Times of India newspaper to improve his English, right? So he says in this, he reads about a student who threw a stone at Indira Gandhi. So we realize that modern people in India have adapted foreign habits. Because we had the foreigners coming over, we were colonized for a long time, we have adopted their habits, such as drinking wine, choosing wine over lassi. Lassi is an Indian drink, right? And this narrator says that it's not right because wine is for drunkards, right? And he also goes on to say that the world cannot be at peace when the bordering countries of India, like Pakistan and China, want a war. So he says Indians are brothers and sisters, and the different people, like he says Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Hindi walas. I know what he means by Hindi walas. There is a tendency of Indians to call everybody staying in North India as Hindi walas, right? And everybody staying in the southern part of India as Madrasi. They don't say South Indian Keralite, they would say Madrasi, right? So this is the kind of tendency that Indians have. So, this is, here we see the narrator, it's a kind of, we can say, a soliloquy kind of thing where a monologue where there is another person right next to this narrator, a dramatic monologue. We have somebody, there's somebody, but we don't see that somebody, but he is speaking to someone, right? So, because in the end you say, but you will visit again. See, towards the end, we realize that this person who is listening to this has lost interest, right? So narrator says, I'll be ready for your company any other time. So this particular poem, The Patriot, I would say would act as a perfect example of post-colonial and post-modern setting, right? So this can be read as a satire or a well-hidden cry for the nation to realize its position as a neo-colonial country, or we are living in a post-colonial world, right? So what has happened is we have adopted all the habits of the people who colonized us. So that is what this basic poem is all about, right? And here we see that the narrator is very interestingly, he is asking a lot of questions. Why aren't we doing this, right? So I just read this. Why aren't we doing? Why don't we? Why do we adapt to the foreign culture? Why don't we follow Mahatma Gandhi? Why aren't we following the wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi? So, there's a lot of questions from the part of the narrator. So what we'll do is I'll just read this poem to you, because this poem is basically something that speaks about the narrator's devotion towards his country, right? So, there is this theme of the desire for peace. That after independence, there is no peace. So there's this desire for peace that is the burning desire in the narrator's mind, right? So he says, like we have imbibed the nature and the habit and also the culture of the colonizers. And what have we done? We have tried to make the language of the colonizers and the habits of the colonizers ours. So he says that it is not right. We need to kind of be typically out and out Indian, right? So that's why he is called a patriot. So I'll just read the poem for you and then we can just discuss about it. It goes like this. I am standing for peace and non-violence. Why world is fighting? Why all people of world are not following Mahatma Gandhi? I am simply not understanding. Ancient Indian wisdom is 100% correct. I should say even 200% correct. But modern generation is neglecting. Too much going for fashion and foreign thing. One day I'm reading newspaper. Every day I'm reading Times of India to improve my English language. How one Gunda fellow threw stone at Indira Behin. Must be student undressed fellow, I'm thinking. Friends, Romans, countrymen, I am saying to myself, nobody's listening to me, lend me the years. Everything is coming. Regeneration, remuneration, contraception. Be patiently, brothers and sisters. You want one glass lassi, very good for digestion, with little salt, lovely drink, better than wine. Not that I am ever tasting the wine. I am the total teetotaler, completely total. But I say, wine is for the drunkards only. What do you think of prospects of world peace? Pakistan behaving like this, China behaving like that. It is really making me sad, I'm telling you. Really, most harassing me. All men are brothers, no? In India also, Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Hindiwalas, all brothers. Though some are having funny habits, still you tolerate me, I tolerate you. One day Ramarajya is surely coming. You are going, but you will visit again. Anytime, any day. I am not believing in ceremony. I am enjoying your company. So this is the poem. So here we see the typical Indian English or the Babu Angrezi or the Bazaar English, which is used to depict the characteristics of the Indian attitude, right? So he has used irony here in this poem to show us the characteristic features of Indian attitude. And what is the Indian attitude? Indians are hypocrites, right? So this poem can be read as a satire, as I said earlier, or a mockery of the speaker of this poem and his claim that he's a patriot, because he's a typical Indian, but we understand that his patriotism is quite shallow, right? So this can be seen as a mockery of the speaker of the poem, because the speaker claims to be a patriot. He longs for everything that is Indian. So here we see that the narrator is a typical Indian, and it's just like worth considering the title of the poem, because towards the end of the poem, the title becomes very ironical. We don't see any kind of deep patriotism in this person. Whatever patriotism is there, it is quite shallow, right? And why? Because he's only talking about his Indian patriotism and he's rejecting non-Indian influences, right? But his actions reveal a love for foreign things. So why does he read the Times of India then? Right? See, look at the first stanza. I am standing for peace and non-violence. Why world is fighting? Why all people of the world are not following Mahatma Gandhi? I am simply not understanding. See, simply not understanding is this Indian use of present continuous tense everywhere. Indians have a tendency of using present continuous or present progressive tense everywhere when they speak. I am coming from. They don't say I come from, right? I am. It's always a continuous tense. Actually, it's wrong. There's no need to use a continuous tense, but Indians have this tendency, and we see in the first stanza itself, he says, I am simply not understanding. See, I simply don't understand. I simply don't understand. Instead of saying that, he said, I am simply not understanding. Right? So, this poem was written by Ezekiel in 1977. Yeah, 1977. And we understand from the when I read the poem for you, you must have understood that it actually criticizes Indians adapting foreign habits, right? So we have understood that the narrator is a patriot, and patriotism is a bigger concept, right? It's not simply kind of not drinking wine or not doing everything like not adapting to foreign culture, not going after fashion. That's all shallow patriotism. Patriotism is a larger concept. But here we see how Nissim Ezekiel defines patriotism with very simple and ridiculous acts that we have all adapted from foreign cultures. And it is narrated here in the first person point of view, and he uses the present progressive tense, right? So here we see in the first stanza itself, the poem outlines different trends that Indians adapt from foreigners. And he says that this adaptation of trends from foreigners defeats Indian culture, right? And we understand that he himself is a hypocrite, right? He says, I am standing for peace and non-violence. Why world is fighting? Why all people of the world are not following Mahatma Gandhi? I am simply not understanding, right? So here he says, the narrator says that the world does not want non-violence, right? And he stands for non-violence, and the world is fighting. So it's like this narrator is confused about why India does not follow the ideal leader Mahatma Gandhi, right? So there's this repetition of this word fighting, fighting. Why world is fighting, fighting? This repetition emphasizes the meaning. So he wants to emphasize that everyone is fighting, and he's the only one who is not fighting. He's the only one who stands for non-violence and peace. So that sounds a little shallow. It sounds a little hypocritical. And that is what Nissim Ezekiel is trying to prove here. The hypocrisy of the Indians. We pass on to the next stanza. Ancient wisdom is 100% correct. I should say even 200% correct. But modern generation is neglecting too much, going for fashion and foreign thing. So he says, he says the wisdom of our leaders, ancient leaders, it's not just 100%. It's 200% correct, right? But we know that there is nothing called 200%. So this is just an emphasis on how this narrator views the wisdom of the ancient people. And he says modern people ignore wisdom. They are busy with fashion, they're busy with foreign habits, trends. But is that wrong? I mean, is it wrong to go after fashion? Is it wrong to adopt a foreign culture? Is it wrong to adopt foreign habits? Does that make your patriotism or your nationalism, does it destroy that? If your nationalism is not strong enough, or if your feelings of patriotism are not strong enough, anything can destroy it. Just because you adapt a foreign culture, or just because you adapt a foreign fashion, or just because you drink wine, does not mean that your nationalism is going to get holes. If your nationalism is going to break under the weight of all this, that is shallow nationalism. That is shallow patriotism. And that is exactly what Nissim Ezekiel is trying to attack here. Right? He says, other day I am reading newspaper. See how he uses the Indian English. He's making fun of the way Indians speak English. Every day I'm reading Times of India to improve my English language. How one Gunda fellow threw stone at Indira Behen. Right? So he talks about reading the newspaper. So he reads the Times of India, the English newspaper. So why does he adapt to the English newspaper? He wants to improve his English. Now, if he is totally patriotic and if he believes that only things of his country are important, he should not learn English language. Right? So he mentions here how one person threw a stone at Indira Gandhi. Now, he says that we are indulging in habits of foreign culture. And what is he himself doing? He's reading an English newspaper to learn a foreign language. So, and what we read in the newspaper is also reveal the disrespect for an Indian leader, right? So, See, that is actually a metaphor for patriotism. Now he says, you're not supposed to disrespect leaders. So now what he says here is that the student threw the stone at Indira Gandhi, or Indira Behani calls her. So that is not right. According to him, that is not right. He calls him Gunda fellow. Now, what he did was not right. I agree with that. But it is not right to disrespect your leaders. That's true. But you might also not agree with everything that your leaders do. So what do? You react to that. Right? So if he says that is not Indian culture, it is quite difficult to swallow that. Because if Indian culture was not a culture that rebelled against leaders or rebelled against people who are in power, we would never have got freedom, right? We rebelled against people who are in power, and that is why we got freedom. And even when we have leaders today, it's not necessary that they would say everything that is right, or they would rule the country in a very just and unprejudiced manner. So he calls this person a Gunda fellow. That is not right. Right? So that shows how his patriotism is so shallow. Right? Okay. Must be student unrest fellow, I am thinking. Friends, Romans, countrymen, I am saying to myself, in brackets, lend me the years. Everything is coming. Regeneration, remuneration, contraception. Right? So he says the fellows that threw stones at Indira Gandhi might be students. Right? So this line, friends, Romans, countrymen, they are the lines of Shakespeare. Right? Again, he is quoting from a foreign language. So it can be considered as a mockery, or even as an appreciation of the language. And regeneration, remuneration, contraception. This refers to the 20-point program. You know that the forced sterilization the people had to undergo to control the population. I'm sure you must have understood that when you went through my lesson, the free radio, right? How the narrator there is, he undergoes the sterilization, right? So which was a forced program of the government to get a radio. So he does that. If you've gone through that lesson, you would have understood that. So he says, this is coming. Regeneration, remuneration, and contraception. This is coming. Now he says, be patiently, brothers and sisters. You want 1 glass lassi? Very good for digestion, with little salt, lovely drink, better than wine. Not that I am ever tasting the wine. I am the total teetotaler, completely total. But I say, wine is for the drunkards only. Now, he asks the Indians to be patient. So he makes patient here, right? And he says, there's a comparison between, there's a kind of difference between lassi and wine. Lassi is Indian drink. It helps in digestion. And wine, according to him, is meant for drunkards, right? And he says, I don't consume it. So this is, we understand that he is trying to glorify himself, saying that he is a teetotaler. Then he goes on to say, what do you think of prospects of world peace, Pakistan behaving like this, China behaving like that? It is making me really sad, I'm telling you. Really, most harassing me. So here the narrator questions or asks us what we think about the world. How can the world become peaceful, he says. He says we cannot be at peace when you have bordering countries, especially in India. We can never be at peace when our bordering countries, India and Pakistan, are always provoking a war. And he's very much disturbed by it. He says, I'm harassed by it. All men are brothers. No, this is a typical Indian speech. You're coming, no? It's not no, that is wrong. All men are brothers, aren't they? That is a right question tag that should be used. But this Indian way of speaking is, you're coming, no? You did your homework, no? All men are brothers, no? That is a typical Indian speech here. In India also, Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Hindiwalas, all brothers. Though some are having funny habits, still you tolerate me. I tolerate you. One day, Rama Rajya is surely coming. right? So he says Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Hindiwalas. Now, Hindiwalas is, as I told you earlier, the typical tendency of Indians to address all people in North India as Hindiwalas and all people in South India as Madrasis, right? So this is all typical Indian language, right? So he questions, he's like asking a question. We are not brothers. Aren't we brothers and sisters? Right? So he says the different people in different states are all brothers, but some of them have adapted to foreign trends. Even when we have adapted to foreign trends and habits, we are all one. We tolerate each other. And he says, Ram Rajya will surely come. The kingdom of Ram will surely come. You are going, but you will visit again, any time, any day. I am not believing in ceremony. Always I am enjoying your company. Now, he understands that the person who is listening to him seems to be uninterested. And he says that one day he will visit and he will enjoy the company. So he says, no, I am not believing in ceremony. It is actually a contrast to one day Ram Raj is surely coming. Because the narrator believes that believes that the kingdom of Ram will come one day, when he says he doesn't believe in ceremony, right? So here we understand that the poem contains very simple language. The diction is also very simple. The language used is Indianized. It relates to English-speaking habits of the Indians, and it also touches on the post-independence era and how we have picked up the habits of foreigners even after independence. So when we look at this poem, we look at the first stanza, we see how this particular poet remarks on the ancient wisdom of India and how he says it's worthy of imitation, right? But later he keeps on lamenting that the modern Indian youth has become so enamored of the foreign culture and they want to imitate foreign habits, foreign manners, the foreign culture. But we understand that this man is a hypocrite, or the narrator's hypocrisy is exposed when we look at his attempts to learn the foreign language. He reads the Times of India, he quotes from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, right? This all, exposes his hypocrisy, and this is an example of the mockery that the speaker is showing. Like, as a patriot, he as a patriot, how can he appreciate and use the language of another culture? He is actually pointing fingers at all those people who are adapting to Indian different cultures, and he himself is doing that, right? He also offers the person sitting next to him or to his listener the Indian drink lassi, and he says it's better than wine, right? Because wine is something that makes you drunk and it's used in Western culture. So for a moment we might think that the narrator is very patriotic, but we understand that in the coming lines, when we read the next lines, we understand that his patriotism is very shallow, because he does not speak about China, he does not speak about Pakistan in a very, he speaks about them in a very bad way, right? And he's only speaking about the, he's only actually telling us about the patriotism of China and Pakistan. He's got problems with that, not with any other country, right? And he also uses a cliche, all men are brothers, right? And he says, here he says like, all men are brothers. In India also, Gujaratis, Maharashtrians, Hindiwalas, all brothers, though some are having funny habits. So here actually he says that some brothers are more equal than others, right? Because he says some of them have funny habits. So here what Nissim Ezekiel is trying to do is he's trying to satirize the narrow-mindedness of the narrator, who tries to define his patriotism much better than that of foreigners. So he is looking forward, he talks about Ram Rajya, right? So he's speaking about a new day that will come, a future that would be rooted in Indian beliefs. But it's still, it implies, I would say, an openness to contact with persons of all cultures, right? So he says, I am not believing in ceremony. And though the poem is meant to present the speaker as a comic figure who expresses pride in his own patriotism, we understand that he's a hypocrite. And his hypocrisy is kind of exposed here, right? The question about the aspect about his tolerance is questioned, right? So just like he has loves for all things which are Indian, we also understand that he likes things which are foreign. Because in some of the areas, we see how he is also trying to adapt to foreign culture, right? And why does the hearer or the person who is listening to him leave? The person who is listening to him leaves because he understands that this man who is speaking, who is claiming himself to be a patriot, is a hypocrite, and that is why he leaves. So we see how this particular poem contains a lot of Indian English examples. I've been talking about that reduplication of verbs. We say fighting, fighting, right? That's Pakka Indian. Now we have this use of repetition of words to give emphasis. Then the lack of definite article, the lack of indefinite article. Look at how he says the Gunda fellow threw stone. Through a stone, he doesn't say through a stone. The lack of articles, right? And the use of present progressive tense, right? So this poem actually shows us the typical Indianization of the language and how Nissim Ezekiel has tried to bring out this poem as a satire on India, on all Indians, right? So the speaker, the narrator, is actually used as an example by Nissim Ezekiel to satirize the Indians or the habits of the Indians, right? And there are some other features also that we see in this particular poem. That is, when he says all men are brothers, no, that depicts the conflict that exists in India because Indians have been oppressed by the British, and the narrator manages to rise above the stereotypes that Indians are vengeful and uncool. So, he wants to prove that Indians are willing to break through boundaries to establish unity among nations at the end, because that is what because Indians have been very familiar with subjugation, domination. So they are people who are willing to break boundaries to establish unity, right? So there is some kind of positive aspect also in this poem, because the final lines, the last lines when he talks about Ram Rajya and all, these final lines illustrate or show us how the nation stands as a united front in welcoming others to experiencing the country as we, the locals, or they, the locals, see it, right? So it is the Ram Rajya. So they're saying, come on, you can come and see that. It is, seen as an entirely new place when spoken about by Indians, especially when Indians speak about it, it's seen as a very new place. It's an entirely different place, right? And because when you look at translations and books written about the Orient by the colonizers, we see that they don't kind of portray or project India the way it is, right? So when he talks about not engaging in ceremony as he will enjoy the company of others, it's a cultural practice within the country. That is, we actually are people who love to welcome others, and how we like to accommodate others also. So we can see a few positive aspects also in this poem, but basically we can say that this is a poem which speaks about shallow patriotism, right? And the narrator is actually made fun of by the speaker or by the poet, and he is representative of many Indians who claim to be patriots but who actually are not, because Patriotism is not something that is related to superficial, mediocre things. It is something that goes far beyond. It is something that lies in the hearts of each person. Because if certain things like adapting to foreign culture, or taking or wearing a dress that is not typically Indian, is something that can destroy the patriotism, then that means our patriotism is not strong. So patriotism is something that goes beyond all these shallow things which this narrator has tried to bring in here. So when the narrator speaks about patriotism, he speaks about certain shallow aspects, certain superficial things. But Nissim Ezekiel wants to prove to us that patriotism is not just something that is shallow, something that is related to the outside, something that is related to the peripheral, but it is something that goes much beyond, and it is something that is there deep in your heart, which should be there deep in your heart. It is something which is noble, which is lofty, which is not just which just cannot be relegated to the mediocre things or the tangible things that we see around us. So that is a poem for you. Do you have any questions?